Ways and Means, we're still here in this room. It's 10:35 and we are picking up our tax classification implementation language. We're gonna do another sort of round of work and edits on this with Kirby and Jake from the tax department. And then the next version we'll send around to stakeholders like the Short-Term Rental Alliance and the Realtors Association and anyone else who wants it. And then we'll have those folks in for testimony next week in case they were wondering when they'd be invited in for testimony. That's when. With that, Kirby, you want to join us? And we will not vote immediately after that. We will not be voting on this until crossover. Lots of time. Yeah. Lots of legislative time. I don't know if it's lots of actual time. Okay.
Good morning.
Oh, sorry, one more public service announcement. I have no idea what vehicle this is going to go into. I don't have a secret plan. Just don't know what vehicle will be the best vehicle yet. Okay, Kirby.
Kirby Keaton, Legislative Council. As Chair mentioned, we are going to walk through some of the updates on the classification language that we've reviewed recently. There are some changes here based off of feedback from last time, and also a little bit more of the fleshing out of what was step 2, going a little bit into step 3 of the Department of Taxes report on this. Most of the legislative action under that report, there's 8 steps as a reminder. Most of the legislative action takes place in the first 3 steps. So at this point, we've included most of the legislative action requests in the report, really dealing with appeals relating to classifications is the last item from the report that's not included. So to give you an idea of the progress we're all making. Hopefully that makes you feel good. So with that, we can get into the language. There's no changes to the grand list of contents sections in 1 and 2. And so the changes we have get into the definitions under the property tax classifications establishment. I added some language here on page 3 that's a reference to the dwelling use attestation language that you'll be seeing later. And the substantive stuff starts on page 4 under the definition of long-term rental. This is where last time there was discussion over farm workers and employees and employee housing. And we have some policy choices here. The choices come down to, partly what degree of depth and detail do you want to try to sort out through definitions, and what do you want to leave to department interpretation and deference there. So there is a version of the farm worker language that's been fleshed out a little bit more than before. Previously, it was just using the term farm worker and leaving it at that. So one option you have is to use a more detailed definition that says, as used in this section, farm worker means an individual employed in agriculture without regard for whether they have an unemployment insurance obligation related to them, and employed by a farmer as that term is defined under current use. And under current use, there's more than one way to qualify as a farmer, but the primary way is based off of having 50% of your income be farm income on your tax return. So that is one approach to trying to narrow down what farm worker means. I'm going to skip the blue language for now and just show that we have a definition of employee here as well. A more basic definition, which is an employee means an individual who is so this adds, in addition to farm worker, by the way, an inclusion in the definition of long-term rental, which those properties qualifying as long-term rentals would be classified as non-homestead, non-residential. So to kind of give you context of what we're talking about. There's subdivision here adding employee housing to that definition of long-term rental. And defining employee to mean an individual who is reported by an employer for purposes of complying with unemployment compensation law.
But farm workers aren't responsible for complying with that, and so we have to add farm worker. Is that the?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. There's agricultural exemption from UI laws, so this would not cover most farm employees. So we have to break those out. So there's your basic versions, and then I'm going to come back up to the blue, which this comes from Abby at Department of Taxes, who I discussed the fact that I was working on these definitions. She spoke with Will, the general counsel there, and they put together a definition based on every thought they had of something that could come up. So a lot more detail.
And so I have a context question on this. Does this chapter and this definition here have any significance in sort of other chapters? So when we say that this housing is a non-monetary benefit of employment, does that then mean that that benefit of employment has anything to do with, say, someone's income tax declaration or anything else?
It's possible. It's possible that it could be used. It would be a very fact-specific situation.
Okay.
None that are direct and obvious to me, but it's definitely possible when you're talking about applying for benefits programs and things like that. There's so many different programs out there that, you know.
So not personal income definitions, but it's possible it could be applied to other definitions.
It's basically what I'm thinking is it could be, this could be used as evidence when someone tries to claim something somewhere else, whether federally, state, you know, someone might be claiming a certain situation in their life based on some benefit or something like that. And then it's definitely possible that whatever agency reviewing that says, well, I don't know how they would have access to what's claimed on a dwelling use attestation. So, you know, that might be part of it too. I'm just saying it's not impossible.
But and I'm less wondering about the individual circumstance of a person and more saying, if we passed this language in this section, would that then mean for the purposes of personal income taxation that we're defining employee provided housing as a non-monetary benefit in writ large across the state? So does that question make sense?
Yes.
That's not the intent here. The definitions are drafted in a way that are for the purposes of tax classification.
Great, thank you. Okay. Representative.
Like Dimble's game of cards for a second here with an example. I'm just trying to figure out how this would apply. Let's say you own, I own an inn. We have an employee who is a hospitality student who is a night manager, and they stay in the apartment because they're the night manager. So it's really a condition of employment. They actually couldn't do the job if they didn't have the thing. How would that fall under this? Would that be a rental or would that be a business space?
We can walk through each because we have two different definitions for you to consider. We can walk through each one. Under the definition that's based off of UI responsibility, in your example, you said this was a student, they're not getting paid?
Well, they are getting paid
Okay.
and they are living on premises because you have to live there
Okay.
overnight as a condition of the work.
So it sounds like there would be a responsibility to pay UI for that?
And they do have that. Yeah.
So under this definition, that would be a long-term rental. we'll have to walk through the others to, so is it okay to walk through that now? The alternative language, which is, doesn't conflict with the other definitions, it just adds more to it. So in this version, it says long-term rental also means a dwelling used to house employees as a non-monetary benefit of employment for at least 6 calendar months, which need not be consecutive in the current calendar year. As used in the subdivision B, employee means an individual who is reported by the employer for UI, or an individual who is employed by a farm employer for farming operations. So this is just taking the two definitions we just looked at. And then it says non-monetary benefit of employment means housing owned or controlled by the employer, whether located on or off workplace premises, and provided for the occupancy of the employee and the employee's family for household members for no payment other than the employee's labor. Payment of utility and fuel charges by the employee does not affect the designation of housing provided as a non-monetary benefit of employment. This is filling gaps that exist with the other more basic definitions, gaps that the Department of Taxes would probably encounter and have to fill themselves if there wasn't statutory language or support for it. So that's your decision, is whether you want to try to fill these gaps in this way.
Carol has a question, but I'm going to just jump in front of Carol for a minute. So this does not consider whether or not that benefit is taxable for that individual. Because if the housing is provided off-site, it may not meet the requirement for being exempt from having to recognize it as taxable compensation. As far as I understand it.
Breaking that down, for one thing, the more basic definition does not have a component that's about non-monetary benefit at all. So I would read that to not have that requirement. So you wouldn't even go into an analysis on that. It doesn't say one way or another, and so I don't think there's room there to read into it that there's a requirement that it be a non-monetary benefit. It could be that the employee is paying you rent.
Okay.
We're still going to call it a long-term rental.
Yeah.
By adding that element to it, it is a question that could come up, and if you want to address it, you can address it. So looking at the second definition for non-monetary benefit of employment, maybe the Department of Taxes uses the information it has available relating to income if it's relevant, but they would look at the income tax information possibly to see if it lines up with what's claimed for this purpose.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm not sure, like sitting here right now, whether there's anything useful on an income tax return. So I guess that's the biggest difference between these definitions is whether you want to make non-monetary benefit of employment a component of a requirement here. And
I'm concerned that we're opening a Pandora's box of like a whole other world of definitions that we don't need to in the context of this piece of language. And so if there's a way to sort of thread the needle and not get into that, it seems like we will save time and energy by not doing that.
Tax department have a preference.
not that I understand. I think this was just trying to be helpful.
Representative Odie?
I was just, based on what you were asking about, Chair Kornheiser, I was wondering, can you put in a statute, this is intended only for use in this particular paragraph in this particular statute and not intended to be used anywhere else in Vermont statutes?
I believe that was a question for you, Carty.
She asked you, actually.
I'm asking Kirby.
Okay, yeah, so this is, I mean, the way that we draft the statutes, it's it is understood within the context of each one where the limits are for these definitions. And in this case, it's standard, and we're doing the standard thing where the definitions that's used for tax classifications under this, I think we have a whole new chapter, right? It says as used in this section. That language is substantive. I mean, it matters. You can't just take these definitions and pluck them somewhere else and throughout Vermont law and try to make a case. I mean, attorneys might try to do that at times where there's ambiguity somewhere else in the law. And they may say, well, this same term is used over here. We don't have a definition, but there's a definition elsewhere in law. And sometimes that's helpful, but that's more of like a guidance when it comes to legal interpretation, or a something that's helpful. It is not definitive when that's done. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Representative Brennan.
So Kirby, just so I understand this more clearly, we're talking about use only as talked about in this section. We wouldn't be talking about any other kind of use. Only employees who get housing as part of their job requirement or a job benefit.
Mhm.
That would be farm workers, and I like the example that Rebecca gave us. I think there are also other people who get housing, like preachers get
Mhm.
parsonage.
And this is, in that scenario, oftentimes that's going to be an exempt property from, because this is all all the tax classification stuff when we talk about it's always just about the tax rate to be applied for education tax.
So it's very specific to this thing that we're talking about right here.
It's very specific to education tax, and it's very specific to the question of what rate should be applied to a particular property. And specifically when we're talking about this the farm worker and employee housing situation, it is to sort out for properties that have these kinds of situations, whether they're going to pay the non-homestead non-residential rate or the non-homestead residential rate, because they're not homesteads in this case. Like in these examples we're never talking about a homestead, because if it is, then that answers the whole question for us. It's going to be the homestead rate. So it's really these situations in which you're trying to discern whether it's non-homestead non-residential or non-homestead residential. The presumption is that non-homestead non-residential would be a lower rate. So a lot of this is about the General Assembly not inadvertently applying the higher rate to situations in which policy-wise it does not want to do that.
Yeah, so, because I'm wondering about the guy who's married and has 3 kids, and he's living in the house on the farm, on the hired man's house. He's getting that. And then we have the other kid down the road living at the ski resort, and he's just living there because he gets housing at the ski resort for doing his job during the winter. So the guy on the farm, I would look at that and I would think that's his homestead. He's got a family there and the wife there. But the kid on this, you see what I mean? We want to make this so that everybody's the same, right? All of these employees, no matter what their circumstances are, we want it to be the same.
I guess, so Representative Brennan, I guess I would say in all cases, it's someone in employee provided housing, and it's not about the taxation on the employee. It's about the taxation on whoever owns the property. And so if it's someone living with no matter how many kids they have, it's about if they own the property or not. And so if that farmer if the person farming does not own the property, then they're not subject to property taxation ever, right? Like even in current law, right? Yeah, because they're not, yeah.
He doesn't know that.
Yeah.
Homestead still farms.
Yeah.
And if other people have questions about the employee housing, I don't want to take us away from that, but I do have like another tabletop exercise.
Okay, before we get to that, okay. Anyone else have anything on the employee? It seems like folks are okay with the farm part, yes? Okay, and then this sort of expanded for ski or gravel pit or whatever employee provided house, nurses. We're sort of trying to find a path to make sure that we're not expanding the law beyond sort of this scope, but we're pretty comfortable with the concept. Okay, great. Representative Burkhart.
So Kirby, I had sent you an example. One thing I wanted to clarify in that example, so the example for everyone else who wasn't included on email is, a family who has an adult child with disabilities, and they're going to have disabilities and need care really the rest of their lives. Parents want to make sure that this child is set up for the rest of their lives when they're not there to take care of them anymore. So purchased a separate house, not a duplex. So an off-site property, a separate house for this child, and then it would be a live-in caregiver in part of the house. And potentially there is an extra bedroom. So potentially one day a roommate who may or may not care as well living, but that's a very specific example, but you could see other broader general examples where parents might set up an adult child in a house that over the long term will be that child's house. But for now, that child is paying them rent. And so it's not homestead, I don't think, because it's completely separate property. It's a separate parcel. The question is how we make sure that we're not putting folks that are trying to figure out our lack of disability supported housing through other means. I don't want to put them in a situation where they would end up having to pay the non-homestead residential rate in a where they're trying to set up their family for care for the long term.
And I think that one is so complicated and yet fairly straightforward. Right?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you could always add clarifications for things like that to the language to make sure that the department lands where you want them to. But applying that, we look at whether it's a long-term rental, a dwelling for which rent is paid. You're saying rent is paid.
For now, while the parents are still in the picture, yes.
Okay, well, we could run through the scenario when that's not the case also. For which rent is paid for the right of occupancy for a period of at least 30 days. Sounds like we have that. With combined rental periods in the current year that total at least 6 months. Sounds like it's going to be year round. We got that. There's a bona fide landlord-tenant relationship between the parties. That's
the tricky thing because it's very subsidized rent and it probably will be as long as he's.
But it's still rent.
But since it's rent and it sounds like it's going to be similar to market rates, because it's being paid for by the US government, it probably has some sort of chart for that sort of thing or something like that. That, it would be up to the department to decide whether that's a bona fide landlord-tenant relationship. Under these facts, I would expect that they would. But of course you can, maybe when they're in here on this sometime, they can chime in on that too. But that's what I would expect. I would expect them to find it to be a long-term rental, or more accurately, this is going to be through an attestation and how dwellings are used. And on that attestation, the property owner will put long-term rental. And that's the position they'll be taking, is that we think this is a long-term rental. And so process-wise, it would be whether the department even questions that. And if they do question it and look into the facts, that's when the question of the bona fide rental or bona fide landlord-tenant relationship.
Thanks. Jake, you're gonna do something if you ever want to say anything, right?
All right.
You're gonna raise your hand or look at me if you ever want to say anything.
Yes.
Great, okay, cool. Good, okay.
Forgot Jake was here for a second.
Yes, Representative Holcomb.
Check my understanding on this one, because I'm aware of a very similar situation where families set up a trust to benefit an adult child with disabilities. And there is somebody who lives there free of charge, but the expectation is that they're going to provide work, so that's non-monetary compensation. But I think the rental would be that I think you're looking at whether there's a financial relationship between the adult child with disabilities and the trust, and which benefits him. And so that would be what would determine the homestead piece, because that would trump the non-monetary benefit given to the person who's staying to care. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Um. I have not done a ton of research on the bona fide landlord-tenant relationship. This is the sort of thing that I would not be surprised if the department came out with a regulation on to break down what all of that means. But I think that, the department will have an idea of, and of course, they'll be basing it off of, the fact that's a term of art and what the law says about that, and apply it to these situations as they come in. I don't feel like I've done enough to be able to say what that's going to mean.
And it seems to me that the sort of secondary scenario that you've both mentioned of the person who's living there and receiving either very subsidized rent or not paying rent in order to partly to provide care, care being defined very broadly, would fall under that employee situation as a non-monetary benefit of employment.
What I'm unclear is if the trust is paying, I don't know, how do you handle if the trust is paying on behalf of the adult with disabilities as opposed to the adult with disabilities using SS?
Yeah.
Buyer?
So I think that's something that would need to probably happen in rulemaking with the department, and we can.
And there would be other options too, to try to find a way to set this up so that it could be claimed as a homestead.
Right. So it becomes a homestead.
Not necessarily.
It could.
In regulations,
could.
You're saying tax can do that.
No, I'm saying that the taxpayers could,
Oh, they could, yes,
um,
yes.
instead of keeping ownership, find a way to change the ownership to
Versus living.
this person who's living there.
So it would be their homestead,
Yes.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
they're,
what I'm hearing is that it will likely fall either under homestead or non-homestead, non-residential, depending on who's owning it. So it's very, very unlikely that it would land, it would have to.
in this case, but I want to be clear that there are scenarios that probably exist where something falls into non-homestead residential that maybe sitting here right now, you are not planning
We
on.
can't think of them.
And I think we can trust the department to bring those to us and provide, exceptions when needed and bring those to us, like that we engage in an iterative process with them. But I think it's interesting. I continue to be heartened by when we come up with these scenarios, even the very variable fact patterns have places where they fall in. Do you have any other changes you want to show us?
There's more changes.
Okay.
Those were the two based off of feedback from last time, but there's some other things. The other question that came up, actually, we haven't covered this yet, was the mobile home, but what about other types of manufactured homes question. So there's some language here that says, that non-homestead residential does not mean a mobile home. That was from before. But I added a clarification. For one thing, I put a definition, and I can share this definition with you if you want to see it. I have it pulled up. There's a definition of mobile home from current law, and then the clarifier, but not including other types of manufactured homes. And that works with the definition that's being referenced because that reference does refer to mobile homes as manufactured homes. The clarifying language, but not including other types of manufactured homes, works with the definition that's being referenced because that definition says a mobile home is a manufactured home that, and then it goes on to define it. Do you have an interest in seeing the definition?
I do, yes. And given that we're going to have extensive conversations about, I imagine we're going to have extensive conversations about mobile homes in the next couple of weeks coming from House General. I encourage us not to feel like we need to completely finish this. Yeah.
Just to add to that, I did look into tiny homes, which are manufactured similar to mobile homes, but there's actually a classification currently in our Microsoft program that identifies it separately.
Hmm.
So I think it'll eliminate, at least currently, those sorts of tiny homes being included in a mobile home as well.
Yeah,
Is it already defined in the Lister handbook? Is that what you were saying?
Well, I don't believe it's in our list of handbook.
Okay.
It's in our Microsoft program,
Oh, okay.
all the categories of, camp,
Yep.
mobile home. And then there is a tiny home category.
Separate from mobile home. Okay.
Separate from the mobile home. So there's a schedule that's affiliated to that category.
Some tiny homes are on wheels,
I'm sorry?
because some tiny homes are on wheels.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the definition that I linked to is, as far as I know, the most basic definition we have for mobile home. It's out of Title 10 under mobile home parks. Mobile home means a structure or type of manufactured home, including the plumbing, heating, air conditioning, electrical systems contained in the structure that is built on a permanent chassis. That's going to eliminate a lot of the manufactured homes that are other things, right? Designed to be used as a dwelling with or without permanent foundation when connected to the required utilities. Transportable in one or more sections, and one of these two things, at least 8 feet wide, 40 feet long, or when erected has at least 320 square feet, or if the structure was constructed prior to 1976. This is, I think, having to do with how these are, like regulations about how these must be built. Or any structure that meets all the requirements, except the size requirements, and for the manufacturer voluntarily files certification with HUD and complies with the construction and safety standards established. So these last parts are, about the size, that has to do with just other laws regulating the size of mobile homes. So that's the definition you have. I think that the permanent chassis part is going to be relevant, and
Chassis. I wasn't trying to correct you. I was really like, my brain was.
it's not a way to say it
No,
ever.
no.
Oh, I've gotten this. I was today old.
Is that
Hmm? I was born in Kentucky.
That's how they say it.
I
I
can't.
was also born in Kentucky, so I don't know if we can write everything off to Kirby's birthplace here.
I was born in Pike County. You were probably born in like what, Louisville?
I was born in Louisville.
Yeah. Some Kentuckians in here about that.
City.
I was born in the Northeast Kingdom of Kentucky.
That's good.
Yeah.
They sell, they,
So yeah, anyways, chassis, if someone in Kentucky said chassis, I would say that's probably not right. So that's probably how we got here. Okay, this is the definition we have for a mobile home, manufactured home. Should I go back to the other language?
Please.
Okay.
Because I'm now back on sort of a question of if I think one of a broad policy goal is to not be discriminating between stick-built buildings, stick-built housing, and manufactured housing, because they're both wonderful places to live. I don't know why we actually need to have this carve out if it can be a home. Yeah. So I might be like overthinking here. Like, it's a home. It's a house. I guess I just don't feel, I'm not sure why we're excluding it. And there might be a really good reason that I lost track of some time between last week and this week. So I'm happy to be reminded.
I mean, it's in the Act 73 report as a recommendation, so I would defer to.
Remind me, Jay, why we might want to do that.
Sure, Jake Gutman, tax department. Also in the Act 73 report is observation that we don't have perfect compliance on homestead declarations. It's probably a gap of around 10,000 at least. So the question is like, who's not filing your homestead declaration? And in a world with a the second homes tax, would they get subject to it? My suspicion, I don't have the data to support it, but if you're in Vermont, your homestead declaration is essentially attached to your personal income tax return, which is a little bit unusual. In other states, you do this with the property tax administrator, so it's a weird triangle. But if you don't have to file personal income taxes because your income is low, you may be forgetting to also file a homestead declaration form. So the reason that I showed up on the report is to try to cut that off as a potential problem. But I understand the chair's point too. It's a policy choice there. Maybe there's another way to encourage better compliance on homestead declarations.
And we will be looking at,
Or higher.
Right.
You can file.
Right.
Mhm.
We can't.
Lower tax.
Would they, see if I'm taxing my way up, there's this new classification at work and I need to go talk to somebody. That's a question.
Did you identify yourself for the record?
Okay.
Oh, great,
Yeah.
cool, great, thanks. So if it's a portion of a parcel with a dwelling that is not a mobile home, would someone put a mobile home up on one end of their property and have a palatial second home on another end of their property and then wind up exempt because of this?
there'll be 2 dwelling units, so that it would use the mixed use. You could possibly,
Okay, great.
you could get some tax savings doing that based on the land value though.
Square footage.
I would love for people to just think on this one, unless someone has a. And we're gonna be spending more time on mobile homes.
I was just gonna say, I think the bill that we're getting from House General might help through this conversation a bit too.
Okay, what else have you done?
Over there, thank you.
Great.
I want to remind you, part of step 2 we covered last time, before I move on, was to start the data collection necessary for this. And there's the provision that we already had from last time, adding to the grand list, data collection relating to the dwellings for each parcel. What's not here though, is the pay question that came up. So just a flag that, in the Act 73 report, the department has suggested finding a way to pay for this work to be done, especially in the first year they flagged, where the initial setup to go from now where we don't track dwellings to within a year locating all of those will be a large task. And the way that this is being structured is going to put that task on to assessing officials. So that's not here, just as a flag. The next part is getting into the step 2, step 3 recommendations from Act 73. We haven't seen language on this before. But the language here would add a dwelling use attestation to the homestead section, the homestead declaration section of law. I did not phrase it so that this requires the dwelling use attestation to be on the homestead. It just kind of heavily implies it because they're there together. So it says annually on or before the due date for filing the Vermont income tax return without extension, each owner of a property with a dwelling, as defined under the dwelling definition we were looking at a moment ago, that includes a dwelling that is not declared as a homestead pursuant to this section, shall file a dwelling use attestation describing how the dwelling will be used in the current year for purposes of assigning a tax classification. What is not addressed here is the 5 or more units issue. I'm not sure. The department had suggested excluding dwelling units in properties that have 5 or more units from the second home classification and possibly excluding it from the requirement to have to claim the dwelling. So I did not add language exempting that situation, although the Act 73 report does suggest to do that, but I wasn't sure where the committee was on that. So the commissioner may collect any additional information through the attestation as required to administer the classification of properties. One example of additional information could be a person saying, yes, this would technically be a second home, except it's exempt. And so having other fields on there for this additional important information. And I try to just write that broadly so that the department, if something else comes up that the department needs additional information on, it can just be included.
And to be, I guess, more questions for you, Jake, but will you go up just a little bit? The filing a dwelling use attestation describing how the dwelling will be used in the current year, it's not that like everyone's gonna need to like file an essay, it's gonna create a form that will have a checkbox on it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Is that for every single parcel though?
So Development Tax Department, the way it's framed in the report is that if you own a parcel with between 1 and 4 dwelling units, you need to file this form. And then it would wrap up homesteads. Homesteads would be easy. It would be basically the same as now, but thinking of like a landlord who has a 4-unit building, they don't have to do that now. But in a new world, they would say, for my 4 units, I check the box, long-term rental for each of them. And yeah, so that's envisioned.
I have a clarifying question for Jake. Is that okay?
Yes.
Are you imagining using the landlord certificate as a way to supplement the gap in knowledge on the 5+ units? Or were you, because my reading of the report was that you were imagining that you don't need that information at all because the classification was going to be done differently?
Yeah, they wouldn't be subject to homestead residential.
Yeah.
What about if, Jake, if someone, like I know of properties in my area, not Brattleboro, but that are 5 or more units where each one of those 5 units is a short-term rental. Would it be the landlord certificate that is your cross-reference on that?
So,
And they're not run as inns, they're not commercial properties.
right, yes, and our representative process active also knows about a property like that, very, so. At least at first, we were thinking to keep it simple. We know that there are about 16,000 short-term rentals in the state, and we know that about 2,000 of them are apartments. So of those apartments, how many are in bigger buildings? What share? And so is the juice sort of a squeeze of having a landlord who has like 100 apartment building going through and checking 100 rows, saying long-term, 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 so you can potentially get a one that's short-term. So at least at first, you keep it simple, but if it's a perceived loophole, then maybe in subsequent years you close it.
So default to non-homestead, non-residential.
Yes, any building with 5 or more.
It's
Yes.
Just while we're talking about this, Jake, I'm just curious, I'm not questioning it by any means, I'm just curious, was there any data behind the 5 or more? Or is it just like a logical assumption that the tax department made?
It was just a data point that I just mentioned about like, of the 2,000 short-term rentals, that that are apartments, where are they likely to fall? And then the other thing about five or more is that we're also trying to minimize work on local officials. And they have already separated out buildings with five or more units into its own categorization. called industrial apartments. So if you take that off their plate, then it maybe makes this whole thing a little bit easier, at least at first.
One more time, go over who has to file the attestations.
Sure, somebody who has a parcel with between 1 and 4 dwelling units. That's generally it. I will say that in Vermont, you can declare a property that's a homestead, even if it's like a seasonal camp. So it's like, it wouldn't even show up as. So there's no law against that, and that would be. So really, it's anyone with between 1 and 4 dwelling units, and if your property is not technically a dwelling unit, if it's your homestead, you can also use this form to report that. If that makes sense.
How are they gonna know
Okay, so our thinking was that, so it's a new requirement, and we were hoping that the first step would be identification of dwelling units. Then the tax department would be sitting on a grand list that says, you know, here are all the parcels with dwelling units, and there could be outreach that would happen in 2027 to say, there's this new requirement you need to know about, and in 2028, you know, you're gonna need to do this. So that is the hope. But this version has that happening in 2027, so it makes it tricky.
I want to, so there's definitely sort of pressure in various places in the building to speed up the timeline on a lot of this, particularly coming from the Senate. And there's a number of reasons to sort of go at pace for this. One, setting a rate before you actually understand the base is just like not good practice for tax policy, right? And so really want to be sort of collecting these forms fully for a year until we, before we set the differing rates. And then also to really give folks a year to be catching up on these forms and give the tax department a year to be catching up on these forms. So this policy is really important to me, like personally as a legislator, and like it's been a 5-year timeline, and we're in like year 2 or 3 of a 5-year timeline. And that's like, we're all sort of doing our work on it. And the patience is hard, but I think it matters to do the work well.
I mean, you could ask for it in 2027, and, you know, in that case, like people would be like, what is this? I think in a lot of cases, but maybe that's good, because maybe 2027 gives them a year to get used to it, and then in 2028, it's prime time. And we're thinking, we're hoping that in FY 29, the whole of the education transformation package is starting. So that's a possibility.
Let's go back to Kirby, and where are you?
I highlighted the language here just as a reminder that the language you're looking at does include the provision that puts the 5 or more unit buildings directly into non-homestead, non-residential, just to be aware that that's in there. And if you want to keep that, then I should turn this blue language into real language. Also, before I proceed, I want to flag, we were talking about timelines. If you keep the current Act 73 timeline of having this all become effective January 1, 2029, then what we're looking at right now is not a mandatory passing for you.
That's right.
It's not mandatory to keep up with the timeline. This could be done next session. If you have the 2029. If you're thinking of making it January 1, 2028, though, it would be a reason to make sure you go ahead and get this done.
I think it's good to get it done regardless.
Mhm. Like I was saying before.
It's good to have people have a lot of time to adjust before rates change.
And it's just the classification appeals is all we have left if you want to try to get all of the legislative work done needed. Okay, so returning to the dwelling use attestation, subdivision 2 here says if the commissioner determines, this is about fraudulent return or fraudulent filings or failure to file. If the commissioner determines that a filed dwelling use attestation contains errors or omissions, or a taxpayer failed to file an attestation as required by this subsection, and further finds that the filing or failure to file was made with fraudulent intent, then the underlying municipality shall assess the taxpayer a penalty in an amount of 100% of the education tax on the property, that is the placeholder I put in here because this is the actual penalty for if you try to fraudulently file a homestead declaration under current law. So an amount equal to 100% of the education tax plus any interest and late payment fee or commission that may be due. Any penalty imposed under this section, any additional property tax interest and late payment fee or commission shall be assessed and collected by the municipality in the same manner as taxes, property taxes. The municipality, I added this provision because it was silent on this, but who keeps it? And as the placeholder, I said that the municipality keeps it. They're going out and collecting it. They can hold on to it. That's what I prepared for today for the dwelling use attestation. I think there could be other things that come up that you might want to also include here. I went ahead and drafted out the repeals. There was a placeholder last time, but the repeals here are the grand list provision that's included here that's redundant with Act 73. Section 61 of Act 73, which is what this is doing, but fleshing out the tax rate multipliers intent language, which was just some session law saying, hey, we're planning on changing the tax rate multipliers. I've put that in here as something to be repealed just to avoid any perceived conflict with that and this, because and then the same thing with 61D, which was the prospective repeal. Well, we're already repealing what Section 61D would have repealed in Act 73 in order to replace it here. So just to prevent any possible confusion about what does 61D mean now that the thing it was prospectively repealing is already repealed.
I want us to be careful that folks don't think we are I want to make sure folks understand that we still have an intent of setting rate multipliers. I don't know who folks are in this scenario that I'm talking about, so like it's a ridiculous switch. Sorry. And that it doesn't seem that we are repealing the contingency around full implementation. Those are both agreed upon intents that would take a lot of everything to.
So I can move that language over into this.
Okay.
And it sounds like that's what you're asking. Yeah.
As much as I don't want everything to be contingent on everything, it is, and I don't know if today's the day to change that. Yeah.
In regards to the timeline, Madam Chair, when are you thinking we would be looking at those rate multipliers?
Once we understand the base, which would probably be next year. Right? Or is it 2 years? I've lost my timeline. I think that's 2 years.
Yeah.
The next year we'd collect forms and then we'd have the base information so the following year. This would be 2028 legislative session
July.
for 2029 fiscal year.
Right. Right, July 1st, 2020, they're effective.
But in the tax report, they already had a few recommendations based on what we considered it would cover.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think there's a requirement for that to be updated in 28.
There's minor semantics thing, not a hill I'm willing to die on by any means, but I just think that having long-term rentals be under a non-homestead, non-residential is just counterintuitive. I still think we should just do non-residential A and B, because either way, we're gonna have to provide definitions to folks.
If you could spend some time not here thinking about something that's like has words rather than A and B, but is more descriptive without bringing a wordsmithing situation into the committee room, that would be cool. Genuinely, like I think, like I genuinely, I think it's a genuine service and I just want to be careful about the Pandora's box that such activities. Yep, thanks. Anyone want to review anything that we've already gone over here? Okay, I will work with Kirby and anyone else that wants to hang out for the conversation sometime this week to sort of remove yellows and blues. And then we'll send it around to the committee and stakeholders for comment. Sound good? Okay. Thanks. We're back downstairs at 1:15 for a joint hearing. That would be room 11. Was it 10 earlier? No, it was never